Sit down right now. Put the phone down for 1 second. Then pick it back up because what I am about to tell you is the moment royal watchers have been waiting 25 years to talk about. And it happened this week, quietly, deliberately, in complete secrecy inside Windsor Castle. And by the time the Queen Consort found out, the portrait was already on the wall. Princess Diana restored, hung, placed exactly where she should have been for the last quarter of a century, side by side with the late Queen Elizabeth in the Hall of Matriarchs, the single most sacred room in the entire royal residence, the room reserved for the women who shaped the monarchy. And for over 20 years, that wall has carried a glaring, unmistakable absence. The most beloved royal of the modern era, missing from her own family. That absence just ended. Let me repeat that because I want you to really feel the weight of it. The most photographed woman in the history of the 20th century. The woman who completely changed the monarchy's relationship with the public. The woman who turned royal visits to AIDS wards and landmine fields into a form of moral leadership the institution had never seen before. The woman who gave the House of Windsor its two most loved modern princes. For over 2 decades, she was not represented on the wall where royal women are honored inside her own family's home. Her portrait sat in storage in the dark, wrapped in protective cloth, invisible to the public, invisible to her own sons when they walked those corridors. Invisible even to the queen she had once called Mama. That is over. It ended this week in a ceremony so quiet that fewer than a dozen people on earth witnessed it. And here is the detail that is going to stop you in your tracks. The two people who pulled this off in total secrecy are Prince William and Princess Anne. Not King Charles, not the palace press office, not a coordinated institutional announcement. William and his aunt, two royals who quietly spent months planning this restoration while the Queen Consort Camilla was deliberately kept in the dark. She was not consulted. She was not warned. She was not even in London on the night it happened. She found out the morning after when she walked back into the palace expecting a normal day. And her reaction, according to insiders, was not grief. It was not composure. It was fury. Immediate, severe, uncontrolled fury. Because in that single moment, Camilla understood what had been taken from her. And she understood, perhaps for the first time, that the era of her being at the center of the royal family was over. Stay with me, because I am going to walk you through every moment of this story. The 20-year buried chess game William has been playing inside his own family. The 5 words princess and said to Camilla's face that palace watchers are calling the most devastating sentence spoken inside Windsor Castle this century. And the moment of silence from King Charles himself, the husband who had defended Camilla for 40 years, that marked the end of an entire era. There is one specific line near the end of this story. A single private remark and reportedly whispered when the portrait was first hung that made the staff in that room, grown adults with decades of royal service, visibly emotional. I will get to it, I promise, but you need the full picture first. Here is the question I want you to hold in your mind. What does a son owe the mother who was taken from him? And what does a monarchy owe to the woman it failed to protect? 25 years of silence. 25 years of quiet acknowledgement. 25 years of a portrait in storage. William answered both questions this week. And the answer he gave was louder than any speech he could ever deliver. Let me set the scene. To understand why this restoration matters so much, you have to understand what actually happened to Diana's presence inside the royal residences after her death. Because the story the public was told for years was always about logistics. Reorganization, curator decisions, rotating exhibits, the kind of language palace spokespeople use when the truth is inconvenient. The truth, according to palace insiders who have quietly confirmed it over the years, was far more uncomfortable than logistics. After Diana died in August of 1997, her portraits were gradually, carefully, and strategically pulled from the most prominent ceremonial spaces inside the royal family's homes. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic sweep, but steadily, deliberately, one by one. A portrait here quietly moved to a side room. A photograph there placed into a less visible corridor. A prominent display in a state apartment swapped out for something less emotionally charged. Over years, the most famous and most photographed royal of the 20th century began to disappear from the visual language of her own family's homes. And the reason, according to palace watchers, was Camilla. I want to be careful and fair here because I am not suggesting that Camilla personally walked down the corridors of Windsor taking portraits off walls. That is not how an institution like the British monarchy actually works. The machinery is quieter than that. Requests are made. Preferences are noted. Curators adjust. Decisions are shaped by the comfort of the most senior figures in the room. And when a new queen consort enters the picture, the visual language of the home subtly rearranges itself to accommodate her presence. A photograph moved here. A framed portrait shifted there. An honor rotation delayed. A commemoration quietly made smaller. Over years, those small adjustments add up. And the overall result in this case was the near total disappearance of Princess Diana from the ceremonial rooms of her own family's homes. That is what William has been watching from the inside for his entire adult life. As Camilla's relationship with Charles became more public, then official, then a full and acknowledged marriage, then eventually a coronation as queen consort, Diana's visible presence inside the royal family slowly disappeared. Patronages were reassigned to other members of the family. Photographs were moved to private quarters rather than public rooms. In the Hall of Matriarchs at Windsor, the most sacred and historic ceremonial space for the women of the royal family, a room that has honored every major royal matriarch across generations, never even received Diana's portrait in the first place. Think about that. For over 20 years. The woman who was married into that family for 15 years, who gave that family its two most popular and photographed modern royals, who literally reshaped the monarchy's relationship with the public through her charity work, her warmth, and her extraordinary gift for connection, was not represented on the wall where royal women are honored. She was not there. Her portrait was not there. Her legacy was not there. And every visitor to that hall, every staff member walking past it, every member of the family standing in the room for a ceremony saw the same thing every time. The woman who belonged there was missing. William noticed. He has been noticing for 2 decades. Here is where it gets absolutely remarkable. Pay very close attention because what I am about to describe is the kind of long-term institutional chess game that almost nobody plays anymore. William, according to multiple palace sources, has been quietly planning this restoration for years, not months, years. Years of carefully documented briefings with senior aides, years of quiet consultations with palace archivists, years of private meetings with curators about portrait placement rules. He commissioned a full institutional review of the Hall of Matriarchs. He requested historical records on every previous portrait placement decision in the gallery's long history. He made sure every single institutional protocol was followed perfectly, every precedent checked, every procedural box ticked, so that when the moment finally came to hang his mother's portrait, no one, not Camilla, not her allies inside the palace, not any institutional objector anywhere in the royal household, could legally or procedurally challenge the restoration after it happened. Read that sentence again. He made every move perfectly so that after it happened, it could not be undone. This was not an emotional gesture made in the heat of the moment. This was a 20-year strategic operation. He was 15 years old when he walked behind his mother's coffin through the streets of London. 15. And from that day forward, according to palace watchers, William carried one quiet promise inside him. That when his time came, when he finally had the institutional power, he would bring his mother home to the wall where she belonged. And he would do it in a way that could never be reversed. This week, he kept that promise. But William did not do this alone. He could not have. The restoration of a portrait to the Hall of Matriarchs is not a decision one person can make by themselves, not even the heir apparent. It requires the cooperation of specific institutional figures inside the royal household. It requires authority over protocol. It requires, in short, an ally. And William needed a very specific kind of ally for this operation. Someone with the institutional power to move the levers. Someone with the personal will to go against Camilla. Someone whose own reputation inside the family was so unquestionable that their involvement in the restoration would be impossible to publicly attack. There was only one royal in the entire family who fit that description. Her name is Anne. Princess Anne. The Princess Royal. The hardest working member of the royal family by every official count for decades. The woman who has completed more royal engagements per year than any other member of her family, year after year after year. The disciplined backbone of the institution. The member of the family who never sought attention and never gave interviews and never complained and never wavered. And who, according to multiple insider accounts over the years, never warmed to Camilla. And who quietly disapproved of how the royal family treated Diana during her lifetime. And who has reportedly become William's most trusted ally inside the palace for nearly a decade. You have to understand something about Princess and to understand what her involvement in this restoration actually means. And is not a sentimental figure. She is not given to grand emotional gestures. She is not the royal who cries publicly or issues stirring statements about love and loss. She is by every account that matters the most professionally disciplined member of her generation. A horsewoman, a former Olympian, the woman who famously once faced an armed kidnapper on a London street, and when he ordered her out of her car, responded with the 4 words that have since passed into British legend. Not bloody likely. She does not scare easily. She does not bluff. She does not perform. And when and commits herself to a course of action, the outcome is, as a rule, inevitable. The two of them, William and Anne, have been working together on this restoration for months. Quiet meetings that did not appear on the official royal diary, unscheduled calendar entries, private consultations with palace staff, conversations in corners of corridors that would never be recorded in any official log. The kind of careful, patient, precise preparation that marks the difference between a symbolic gesture and a permanent institutional change. Because here's the thing, Anne is the only royal in the entire family with the institutional authority to override Camilla. Her royal rank, her seniority, her respected position in the family hierarchy, her spotless record of service. All of it gave her the standing to do what nobody else could have done. And her reported personal discomfort with Camilla's rise gave her the will to actually do it. The authority and the motivation lined up in one woman. William could not have pulled this off without her. And Anne, according to sources, was not just a participant. She was an active, willing, deliberate architect of the entire restoration. And then this week, everything finally moved. Let me take you inside the Hall of Matriarchs on the night it happened, because the details of what actually occurred are the kind of thing that palace watchers are going to be talking about for the next 30 years. According to multiple witnesses, the portrait of Princess Diana was brought into the Hall of Matriarchs in the early evening hours, a time when the gallery had been officially closed to visitors. Only a handful of trusted staff members were present. No cameras, no press release in the pipeline, no advanced social media announcement. Just a small, carefully chosen team of curators, archivists, and senior aides. Each of them briefed on the sensitivity of the moment. Each of them understanding that what was about to happen inside that room would remain absolutely confidential until the moment the palace chose to acknowledge it publicly. Princess Anne, according to sources, oversaw the placement personally. She did not delegate this. She did not watch from a corner. She stood in the room. She was present for every step. The portrait, which had reportedly been kept in palace storage for more than 2 decades, was carefully removed from its protective wrapping. Imagine that for a moment. A canvas that had not been seen by human eyes in 20 years. The painting of a woman who changed the monarchy forever, lying in climate-controlled darkness, while the world outside her family slowly forgot the details of what had once hung in those ceremonial rooms. The protective layers came off. The frame was prepared. The precise placement on the wall was confirmed down to the millimeter because palace protocol does not leave placement to chance. Measurements were taken, angles were checked, the lighting was adjusted, and within a window of approximately 90 minutes, Princess Diana's portrait was carefully, reverently hung directly beside the portrait of the late Queen Elizabeth II. Picture that moment for a second. A room full of centuries of royal matriarchs, queens and consorts and grand duchesses looking out from gilded frames. All of them watching, in effect, as a member of their own sisterhood was finally returned to the wall. The staff, according to one account, stood back after the placement was confirmed and simply looked. No one spoke. No one clapped. There was nothing to say. The portrait was where it should have been from the very beginning. And the silence in that room in the moments after the placement was by every account the most profound kind of institutional silence. The kind that falls when something important has just been set right and everyone present is aware of it. 2 queens side by side finally. One who reigned for 70 years and watched the world transform around her throne. One who never had the chance to reign at all, but who reshaped the monarchy's human face in 15 years of public service. Side by side, where the British public has always quietly believed they belonged. Where the family itself has finally acknowledged they belong. I cannot overstate what that placement means because Diana was never a queen. She was never going to be queen. The divorce ended that possibility years before her death. And yet in placing her portrait next to the late queen's, William and made a statement that goes beyond technical royal rank. They said in effect that Diana's contribution to the institution was so profound that she belongs among the queens, not because of a title, but because of what she gave, what she did, what she represented. And the late queen herself, who had a complicated but ultimately deep and genuine affection for Diana, would, according to many who knew her, have approved of this placement, would have perhaps quietly wanted it. And here is where I need to tell you about the single moment that has already become the emotional center of this entire story. The remark. One of the staff members present in the Hall of Matriarchs that night reportedly heard, and standing quietly in front of the newly hung portrait, speaking almost to herself. Not to the team, not to cameras that were not there, just to the portrait itself. For small words. She belongs here. She always did. She belongs here. She always did. That is the line that closes a 25-year wound. That is the line that staff members, grown adults with decades of royal service behind them, reportedly carried out of that room with them as a private emotional memory. That is the line that William, when he heard it, reportedly went quiet for a long time before responding. Because those 6 small words carry the weight of everything the institution failed to say for a quarter of a century. They carry the weight of Diana's displaced portraits, the reassigned patronages, the muted acknowledgments, the careful institutional forgetting. All of it collapsed into one simple sentence spoken quietly by the Princess Royal in a room that had waited 25 years to hear it. But while this was happening inside Windsor, Camilla was somewhere else entirely. And the timing of that absence was not accidental. Pay close attention to this next part, because this is the part most people will never fully appreciate unless you understand how royal schedules actually work. Camilla, according to multiple sources, was outside London on a scheduled engagement the night the portrait was hung. A routine appearance, nothing dramatic, nothing she would have thought twice about. And that engagement, according to palace insiders, had been deliberately and strategically timed by William's team precisely to ensure she would be away from Windsor at the moment the restoration took place. Let that sink in. Her own engagement schedule, the calendar that governs every day of her life as Queen Consort, had been quietly arranged so that she would not be present inside Windsor Castle on the specific evening the portrait was put back on the wall. That is not coincidence. That is planning. That is the level of strategic thinking that marks a 20-year plan reaching its moment of execution. Every variable was controlled, including the most important variable of all, her physical presence. She returned to the palace the following morning, expecting a normal day, expecting her usual briefings, expecting her usual schedule. She walked in, and within minutes she was informed of what had happened, of what was already done, of what was already hanging on the wall in the Hall of Matriarchs. Permanent, institutional, and beyond any single person's power to reverse. Her reaction, according to palace insiders, was immediate and severe. She was furious. That is the word multiple sources have used to describe what unfolded in the minutes after she received the news. Not shocked, not hurt. Furious. She demanded the portrait be removed at once. She demanded an emergency meeting with William. She demanded Charles intervene on her behalf. She demanded an explanation from the palace staff who had carried out the restoration. She demanded everything that a queen consort at the top of her institutional power would normally be able to demand and receive within an hour. And every single one of those demands was refused. Every single one. The portrait was not removed. William did not grant her an emergency meeting. The palace staff did not produce an explanation. The protocol officers, who might normally have moved quickly to accommodate a queen consort's urgent request, simply noted the request and proceeded with the day. For the first time in her entire royal career, Camilla discovered that the institution she had spent decades learning to navigate no longer responded to her demands in the way it once had. The levers she had always been able to pull were either stuck or disconnected. She was, in the cold institutional language of the palace, no longer the figure whose demands automatically carried weight. Try to imagine that experience as a human being, not as a public figure. You wake up in a building that is technically partly yours. You are the queen consort of the realm. You have spent 40 years climbing, fighting, enduring tabloid abuse, surviving public hostility, and finally reaching the top of an institution that now calls you your majesty. You walk the corridors with the confidence that comes from institutional power. You make a request. Normally, the request is granted. Normally, the machinery turns. Normally, doors open. And on this morning, for the first time, nothing turns. Nothing opens. The polite professional nods that have governed your every interaction for decades are still there. But underneath the surface, nobody is actually doing what you have asked. The system has quietly decided that your authority on this particular matter is not what it was a week ago. And there is no legal document you can waive, no protocol you can cite, no husband you can call on to reverse that decision. Because the husband, as you are about to discover, is not going to help. And then came the part she truly never saw coming. The part that, according to insiders, broke something inside her that had not been broken in 40 years. Her own husband Charles refused to defend her. Read that again. Let it land. The husband who had spent 4 decades defending Camilla's place inside the royal family. The man who had fought against the public, against his own mother at times, against the resistance of an entire establishment to make her first his partner, then his wife, then eventually his queen consort. The king who had stood by her through scandal after scandal, through tabloid campaign after tabloid campaign, through decades of ridicule and condemnation and institutional resistance. Charles looked at his wife and said nothing. He let his son's decision stand. He let his sister's actions go unchallenged. He let Diana's portrait remain exactly where it had been hung the night before. And in that single moment of silence from her own husband, Camilla reportedly understood with terrible clarity that her time at the center of this family is over. Not ending. Over. The institutional choice had been made, and it had been made against her. Charles, by all accounts, has chosen his path. He has chosen the institution. He has chosen his son. He has chosen his late mother's legacy. And he has finally chosen to honor Diana. The wife he wronged decades ago has at long last been granted the place inside the palace that she always deserved. The man who once allowed her to be written out of the visual language of her own family's home has now allowed her to be written back in. Too late perhaps, but not so late that it does not matter. Because gestures, even delayed ones, carry weight. And this gesture will carry weight for generations. There is something deeply human about what Charles did by saying nothing. I want to be clear because even a silence at that level of power is a choice. A very loud choice. He could have issued a statement. He could have demanded a reversal. He could have sided, as he had for 40 years, with the woman he married. And the fact that he did none of those things, the fact that he simply let the moment pass, let the portrait stay, let his son and his sister complete what they had set in motion, tells you everything you need to know about what is happening inside his own conscience. Charles, at this stage in his reign, with his own health fragile and his legacy compressing in front of him, appears to have made peace with something that he could not make peace with 30 years ago. That Diana was, in a way he once refused to admit, irreplaceable to the institution. And his son is right to bring her home. That silence may be the most meaningful single act of his kingship so far. And then, according to sources, Princess and walked into the room. This is the moment I mentioned at the beginning. The moment royal watchers are calling the most devastating sentence spoken inside Windsor Castle this century, and reportedly delivered the news to Camilla face to face. She did not raise her voice. She did not soften the blow. She did not deliver a prepared speech. She looked at Camilla and she said 5 words. 5. Just 5. It is what Diana deserved. That is it. No apology, no explanation, no elaboration, no softness. Just a statement of fact delivered in the plain, straightforward language of a woman who has spent her entire life choosing duty before diplomacy. It is what Diana deserved. Not more than Camilla. Not less than Camilla. Just what Diana deserved. The same truth the British public has known for 25 years. The same truth Diana's sons have known their entire adult lives. The same truth that the late Queen reportedly acknowledged privately in her final years. Sit with that sentence one more time. It is what Diana deserved. Because what makes those 5 words so devastating is not the anger inside them. There is no anger in them, and is not someone who shouts, and is not someone who lectures, and is not a woman who makes scenes. What makes the sentence devastating is the simple, fact-based, institutional certainty of it. It is the voice of a princess royal who has been watching a wrong go uncorrected for 25 years and who has finally, with the support of the next king, fixed it. And in fixing it, she is telling the queen consort without any hostility in her voice that the correction is not a debate. It is not a conversation. It is not a negotiation. It is a completed act. The wall is what it is. The portrait is where it is. And the reason, the only reason, is because it is what Diana deserved. And in those 5 words, and did something that no palace press release, no carefully worded statement, no coordinated communications effort could ever have accomplished. She defined the new institutional position of the royal family. Diana matters. Diana deserves. Diana belongs. The era of careful ambiguity was over. The era of quiet acknowledgement was over. The era of diplomatic distance was over. And the woman delivering that news with the calm authority of the princess royal was not someone Camilla could appeal to, outrank, or persuade. She was the voice of the institution itself, speaking with an authority that even the queen consort could not override. But stay with me because the restoration of the portrait is only the beginning of what is happening inside the palace right now. And the changes that have followed in the days since are in some ways even more significant than the moment the portrait went up. Palace insiders report that royal patronages tied to Diana's legacy are being quietly reactivated under Catherine's office. Charities that Diana once championed, organizations that lost their highest-profile patron in 1997, are being prioritized in William's official engagement schedule. The language of official royal communications has shifted noticeably. Diana's name, her contributions, her specific work have been referenced more in the past 2 weeks than they were in the past 2 years combined. The institutional machinery that had gradually written her out of the monarchy's visual and spoken language is now visibly and measurably writing her back in. And Camilla, meanwhile, is moving in the opposite direction. Her name has been appearing less frequently in palace press releases. Her engagement schedule, according to reports, has been reduced. Several upcoming public appearances she had been scheduled to attend have been quietly reassigned either to other royals or simply removed from the calendar altogether. These changes individually are small. Collectively, they tell a story. The woman who once occupied the center of royal communications is being moved with professional subtlety but unmistakable direction toward the edges. If you have ever watched the slow fade of a senior executive inside a major organization, you know exactly what this pattern looks like. It is not a dismissal. Dismissals are loud. Dismissals come with press releases. This is a colder and older mechanism. The work simply stops arriving. The meetings get smaller. The invitations get redirected. The name stops appearing where it used to appear. And everyone in the institution, from the most senior aide to the most junior calendar coordinator, understands what is happening without a single memo ever being circulated. It is the professional equivalent of watching a tide slowly pull back, steadily, without confrontation, until one day you realize the water is no longer where it used to be. That, according to palace watchers, is what is happening to Camilla's institutional footprint right now. This is not a single evening of symbolism. This is a complete, quiet institutional reshaping of the royal family's identity. William is not just rehanging a portrait. He is rebuilding the visual, ceremonial, and public language of the monarchy around his mother's legacy. And the message to everyone inside and outside the palace is unmistakable. The era of Diana's invisibility is ending. The era of Diana's institutional memory is beginning permanently. Let me bring you back to the 15-year-old boy walking behind the coffin, because that is the image I want you to carry away from this story. September of 1997, a cold, bright morning in London, a royal funeral. 2 boys, William, 15, Harry, 12, walking behind the coffin of the woman who had shaped every day of their childhood. The cameras of the world on them. The entire globe watching. The boys holding themselves with a composure that no child that age should ever be asked to summon in public. And palace watchers say that from that day forward, William carried one quiet, private promise inside him. That when his time came, when he finally had the institutional power to make it happen, he would honor his mother. Not with a statement, not with a speech, not with an interview, but with an act so substantial that it could not be reversed, ignored, or reduced. Think about what that promise required of him. Not 6 months of planning, not a year of planning. 2 decades, 20 years. 20 years of learning which institutional levers would actually move the machinery. 20 years of building alliances with the right aides, the right curators, the right archivists, the right members of his own family. 20 years of waiting, holding himself back, holding his position until the moment the political and institutional conditions were exactly right to ensure that the act could not be undone. That is not grief driving a decision. That is grief shaped into strategy. That is the most disciplined kind of love. The kind that refuses to spend itself too early. The kind that waits like a river shaping stone until the conditions are precisely right to reshape the landscape for good. And I think that is what most people watching this story unfold from the outside are going to miss. Because the tabloids are going to frame this as a dramatic confrontation between a son and a stepmother. And yes, in one sense it is that. But at a deeper level, this story is about patience. It is about a 15-year-old boy at a funeral making a promise to himself and then spending 20 years quietly building everything necessary to keep it. There are not many people in any field, in any family, in any institution who could have done that. William did. This week, with Princess and beside him, he kept that promise. Diana is back on the wall where she always belonged. Camilla is out of the room where decisions are made. And William has finally, after 25 years, done what he had been preparing his entire adult life to do. If Diana is watching, somehow, somewhere, she would be so profoundly proud of the man and the king her son is becoming. The discipline, the patience, the strategic precision, the refusal to rush, the 20 years of quiet preparation for a 90-minute ceremony. That is not emotion overriding judgment. That is emotion channeled, shaped, and used with the institutional skill of a future monarch. She raised him to be exactly this kind of man. And this week, he proved that her influence, the influence Camilla and others had spent decades trying to minimize, remains the single most important shaping force on the next reign of the House of Windsor. So let me bring you back to the question I asked at the very start. What does a son owe the mother who was taken from him? And what does a monarchy owe to the woman it failed to protect? The answer, as you have just witnessed, is everything. A son owes his mother everything. And a monarchy, when it finally finds its conscience, pays that debt by putting her portrait back on the wall, by restoring the patronages she loved, by speaking her name aloud in the ceremonial rooms where she was quietly erased, by allowing a princess royal to say 5 words that close a 25-year wound, and by allowing a king's silence to end an era that should never have begun. That debt has now begun to be paid. And the British public, the people who love Diana more than any other royal of their lifetime, are already responding. Social media, palace fan communities, royal watchers around the world, all of them sensing even before the official announcement that something enormous has shifted inside the walls of Windsor. The mood around the monarchy for the first time in a long time feels different. Cleaner, lighter, more honest. This was the moment. This was the week. This was the quiet, beautiful, strategic restoration that the British people have been waiting a generation to see. And the larger meaning of it, the lesson for those of us who will never walk the halls of Windsor, but who have at some point lost someone we loved before we could speak for them, is simple. Some debts take a very long time to pay. Some wrongs take decades to correct. Some promises made silently in the grief of a funeral require 20 years of patience to honor. But they can be honored. And when they are, the person who finally makes it happen has not just restored a portrait. They have restored themselves. They have kept faith with who they were at 15 when they made the promise. They have kept faith with the person they lost. And they have shown every other person still carrying an unpaid emotional debt from childhood that the debt can in fact be paid. It may take 20 years. It may require allies. It may require strategy. But it can be done. Diana did not live to see her son become a man. But her son became a man who finally this week brought her home. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me which moment of this story moved you the most. Was it Diana's portrait finally restored to the wall? Was it Anne's 5 words delivered face to face? Was it Charles's silence, the husband who chose not to defend his wife for the first time in 40 years? Or was it William finally, after 2 decades of quiet preparation, keeping the promise he made to himself at 15? I read every single comment, and I want to know where this story landed for you. If this moved you, do me 2 quick favors. Hit that like button because it genuinely helps this channel reach more people who want to follow these stories with the depth they deserve. Hit subscribe because the next chapter is already unfolding inside palace walls, and I am going to bring it to you the moment it breaks. Then click the next video on your screen because what comes after a restoration like this one is the fallout. And the fallout, as you are about to see, is already reshaping the royal family in ways that will define the next decade. Stay with me. The story is only just beginning.